Hello, everybody. Hi there. Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. We're going to move on to the entertainment part of this section, this lunch. I get the honor to introduce our next speaker. Teri, she was named the Deputy Director of Planning and Investment in April of this year. First ever Deputy Director of Planning and Investment at UDOT. Very proud to have her as part of the team. Prior to that, she worked down in Region 3, where she took Region 3 to a whole new level. Very proud that she went down there and took over and really ran the place and made it her own. So I get to say a few kind words to Teri before she comes up. Linda laughs. I've learned a few things from Teri over the last few years. First of all, I've learned a great deal of patience. I thought I had a ton of patience when I got this job, but after having Teri in my life for a while, now I have much more patience. I think she might disagree with that, but I've learned a lot of patience. And then the second thing I've learned is the value of feedback. So every year after I'd walk off this stage, I would get the opportunity to have some feedback from Teri. Whether it was solicited or unsolicited, it was always there. And I am looking so forward to about 30 minutes from now when I get to share that feedback back with Teri. So good luck to Teri. But in seriousness, though, Teri introduced the senior leadership team to a book a few years ago called The Happiness Advantage. And I want to thank her for that. It has completely changed my life in a very serious way. It is, I wouldn't be here today, I don't think, had I not had that book in my life. My family believes that I'm a much better person because of that book. And I greatly appreciate Teri for bringing that to our team and making me read it, because it really has made a difference in my life. I guarantee that I would definitely still be 230 pounds had I not had that book. So I appreciate that, Teri. Thank you very much. So with that, welcome to the stage, my friend, Teri Newell.
Changed your life. Okay, I just want to start out by saying this is not a picture of me, because most of you are never going to see me in a dress in my lifetime. So anyway, this is a picture of my grandma Vivian, and she was born on a small farm in central Iowa in 1920. She celebrated her 98th birthday on Sunday, and incredible that she's been alive for nearly a century. And in that time, I thought I would reflect back over that and be able to tell you all these stories about how she had seen the technology for transportation change in her lifetime. But what I actually found out was the technology for transportation didn't change that much. So let's take a look at what was going on with transportation in 1920, in the year she was born. We had passenger rail that was making its way between communities. We had electric streetcar that allowed people to move within a community, as well as we had biking and walking. We had airplanes that were in 1920 in Iowa hauling freight. And the part of it that surprised me the most was when we start to look at automobile travel. And by 1920 in Iowa, 30% of the households or the families already owned a vehicle. And of the manufacturers who were making cars at that point in time, 7 of those are still making vehicles today. And while the look and feel of those vehicles may have changed, the technology behind them really hasn't. We're still using the internal combustion engine. So you look at the transportation technology didn't change a whole lot, but I'd like to make the case that there were a lot of things that changed in my grandmother's life in regards to transportation, and it had a big effect on her life. So let me continue with her story a little bit. So my grandmother, when she was 16, she left the farm and she moved into town with her older sister. And they moved into the town of Tama, Iowa. And let me just give you a little bit of history on that because I think it's interesting. If you look across the bottom of south end of town here, you see a big rail system. And this map was actually from the year my grandmother was born. So what happened with how a lot of the small towns developed in Iowa was really based around transportation. But in those days, it was based around the rail system. So Tama was founded during the Civil War. And that was really the decade or two before that is when you really started to see rail expand across the state of Iowa. And that expansion continued up until about the year my grandmother was born in 1920. And about that year, you had 10,000 miles of track going across the state of Iowa. That may seem like a lot of rail transportation, but if you think about the economy in Iowa, it was mainly in those years based around farming. So trying to get produce and livestock to market, it was important to have a really good rail network so you could get that freight to market. So by the time my grandmother was born, that was about the end of that expansion, and you started to see more of a switch over to automobiles and highways. But part of the rail locating where it did, I have an arrow pointing to where Main Street was. And you start to see a main street like this that developed near the rail line. And like many small towns all over the place, these buildings are still there today. So that just gives you kind of a little bit of a look and feel of Tama. So I'll continue on with my grandma's story. When she was 18, she married my grandpa. And when she was 19, she had my dad. And that's a picture of her holding my dad. And if you look at the house that's in the background on this photo, that house is where my grandpa was born. My grandparents were renting that house, and eventually they saved up enough money to buy the house, and my grandmother lived in that house for the next 75 years. So this was located south of the tracks, you might say the wrong side of the tracks, but it was located very close to the railroad. And there's some good things and bad things about that. And when I was a kid and I used to spend the night at my grandparents' house, I remember waking up in the middle of the night, sitting up in bed because a freight train would be coming through town about 70 miles an hour, and they'd blow on that horn as they came through town. So I have really strong memories about trains. But then one of the good things about it is that my grandparents also lived close to what we called Uptown Tama. So when I would stay with them, I could walk uptown with my grandma, and she would take me to the meat market uptown, and she'd let me pick out bologna and hot dogs that my mom wouldn't let me have. Now, when my grandpa took us into town, he would take us to the bakery, and he'd let us get donuts, and then he'd have us go down the street to the shoe store, and he'd buy us grasshoppers. For my grandpa, that meant tennis shoes. So we transitioned in this area from an existence based on rail to what you see further north on the map is the Lincoln Highway. That was really the transition to more of automobile usage. And if you look at the picture I have on the east side of town, that's one of the first bridges in Iowa on the Lincoln Highway. And this is a picture of that bridge. And I think it's important for a couple of reasons. The community understood the importance of that transition from rail and going to automobiles, so they wanted to make sure that they had a place on the Lincoln Highway. This bridge was built with private funding from the community prior to the alignment being identified. So they took a chance, built the bridge, put the name Lincoln Highway on it with the hope that the Lincoln Highway would go through their town. So it was pretty strategic on their part. And I'll say another thing with this picture that's important for me personally. I was the youngest in my family, and when we were traveling to Grandma's house, we traveled down the Lincoln Highway to get to their town. And I was always the one in the back seat saying, "Are we almost there yet?" Anybody who's got kids knows that happens, right? Are we almost there? And as soon as we got to this bridge, I knew that we were just a few blocks from Grandma and Grandpa's house. So this is a bridge on the National Historic Register. It's still in place today and looks very much like that today. So now let's just talk a little bit more about how Lincoln Highway ties to my grandparents' story. This is a picture of my grandpa Lionel, and he's holding my dad in his lap. And this is from 1940. And in the 1940 census, my grandpa was listed as a chicken feeder. I kind of looked at that and was like, a chicken feeder, I'm going to assume that's not a real high-paying job. So his ability to try to take care of his family, and at that point, he was married to my grandma, he had my dad, he also had his widowed mother, my great-grandmother, living with him. So his ability to take care of the family was based on his access to jobs. And in the town of Tama, which was less than 3,000 people, the number of jobs he had access to was not very great. So that's something that was important for his life, is having access to jobs that existed beyond Tama. So now this picture is on the Lincoln Highway in 1920, the year my grandmother was born. Now I would not call that a reliable transportation system, because in Iowa, anytime it rained, you were not going to be traveling very easily. So for my grandpa, Lincoln Highway was not a help until there started to be one of the big changes that I think there was in transportation during that time, and this is for you, Linda. It was the way we funded our transportation system. So we started to think about, instead of just doing private funding, raising private funds to pave a roadway, we started thinking about things like a federal gas tax and a way to fund a system so that we could put the good planning into it and strategically get a route clear across the country. So at some point, the Lincoln Highway became paved, and it was around in the 30s. So what that meant for my grandparents was, this happens to be an image of the first car that my grandpa ever owned. It happens to be a 1928 Chevrolet sedan. I verified that fact with my dad. I wouldn't have known that otherwise. But that was the type of car that my grandpa had. And the fact that he was able to buy that car and the Lincoln Highway became paved as a reliable source of transportation allowed him to get a job in Marshalltown. Marshalltown happens to be 30 miles away from Tama on the Lincoln Highway, of course. So he worked in the Marshalltown trowel factory for the next 35 years, and I'm going to tell you that that changed the quality of life for my grandparents.
6:30 in the morning.
Whoa. Sorry, can we pause? I thought I got to click to start the video. So I just want to introduce this one quickly. So let's fast forward 75 years, and we're going to listen to the story from Bob Westover, and he had the opportunity to be the project director on the I-15 Technology Corridor project. But for him, taking that job meant he was going to have to go an additional 20 miles to go to Lehigh for that job. And he was already driving a long ways from Santaquin to get to Orem to start with. So he had to really think about that extra 20 miles and what that might mean for his quality of life.
Smart.
6:30 in the morning. I drive from Santaquin to the Provo front-runner station, catch the train there, and ride to Lehigh, get off at the Lehigh station, walk the few steps it is from the front-runner station across the road to my office. Moving the office was an additional 20 miles one way for me every day. The other, it made it acceptable to take it because the station was so close to our office. And the other thing was, just seemed like it was probably a good idea to get one more car off the road during the peak hours. During the commute, you don't have to be focused on driving. You can do email, you can relax, you can do other sort of things. And while it takes a little bit longer to make the commute, it's not wasted time.
Okay, so with Bob's story, he had a choice that he was able to make, and one that made him willing to be able to take a different job, and that was his ability to choose to take transit, which made it a less stressful commute for him. So one of the other differences, one of the similarities between the two, or differences between the two stories, is Tama, Iowa had 3,000 people in 1940, and currently it still has less than 3,000 people. So no economic growth there and no population growth. Whereas what we're facing in the state of Utah is more than a doubling of our population. So as you see all of the people expanding in this area, we've got to figure out how to get them to travel around. So we need to have all the solutions available to us. We're going to build new roadways. We're going to widen existing roadways. We're going to build out a good grid network so that we can help distribute that traffic better. We're going to use travel-wise strategies. We're going to encourage carpooling and changing our travel times. And then we're going to need to build more transit into our system. And when we think about that transportation system, we need to think about how it connects to our land use and make sure that we're making our jobs and our housing closer together so we can eliminate or shorten some of those trips. And then we need to make sure that we connect all of that together with a good active transportation system. And then when we finish with that, we need to make sure that we're adding the right technology to all of our projects so that we can operate our systems more efficiently. Can you pause that one, please?
Giving the...
Thank you. Oh, Eric is doing a really nice job of talking backwards and quietly. I don't know where Eric is, but he didn't know that was going to happen. So just to introduce what Eric's going to talk about, he's going to talk a little bit about technology on a project that we called the Provo Orem Trip Project. And let me just explain a little bit about that. It was a project that added a third lane in each direction to University Parkway. It put a bus rapid transit system down the middle of that roadway, and then it added the technology to help make that operate more efficiently. And ultimately, what that project was branded in terms of transit was the Utah Valley Express, or UVX. Am I controlling now?
So it's a smart system giving the UVX a short bump in the green time when the bus is behind schedule. When it's ahead of schedule or on schedule, it continues to flow with the normal flow of traffic. So there's a radio in the signal and on the bus. They're talking to each other, and the bus knows when it's on schedule, and the signal knows when it's going to change green, and they're coordinating those two action points to maximize the reliability of the transit system. We're looking for better ways to optimize our system using operations and technology. It will result in a higher reliable transit system with reduced travel delay on the side street, ultimately resulting in better air quality in Utah County.
Okay, so Eric talked about the technology on the project, which if you've gone to any of the other sessions on technology or that project in particular, we will have that technology working in December. But I think what is just awesome is how successful Utah Valley Express is already. What started out with 2 bus routes that were taking 1,800 boardings a day, it's now up to 9,600 boardings per day. And I think that's just a wonderful story of success. But let me just talk a little bit about the end user for this story. And I didn't have this end user story until actually just on Friday night. I came home from work, and my son had a friend over who knew that I had been working on Utah Valley Express kind of in a remote way, but he knew I had been familiar with it. And he wanted to tell me how excited his sister Anna was about the fact that it had finally opened. She and her husband live in Provo. Her husband works in Provo, and she's a university student. And she doesn't go to BYU. She doesn't go to UVU. She actually goes to the University of Utah. And she's thrilled that it opened because she's chosen to not own a car. And so for her to get around, Utah Valley Express is very important for her. So she uses it to get to Front Runner and then on into Salt Lake City. So there, the end user had a choice to not have to own a car, and that's something I think we have to be paying attention to with the younger generations. Okay, so I've got one more story for you. So about a year ago, I received this email, and it says, "I never cross under 2100 North without smiling and thinking of you in the trail crossings. I was probably thinking these were crazy at the time. Thanks for being right." So I looked at the picture, so the selfie came along with it, along with the email, and I wasn't quite sure, it didn't make sense to me. The picture didn't match the name for me, so I sent a vague email back, you know how you do that, and say, "Oh yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying the trail system, hope you're doing well." Well, I received another email back, and it was a rather lengthy email, and it was Ed telling me his story. So I would like you to hear his story in his own words. So, cue
2015,
video.
I had weight loss surgery, and one of my goals as I was losing weight was to try to get physically active. And I thought, you know, if I can get back on a bicycle, I can ride back and forth to work. I decided that sooner or later I was going to have to try to ride my bicycle down into the Dry Creek Basin and then get back up the other side. And my goal was to just do that without walking. If I can do that, then I can ride my bike to work. So I started riding my bike to work, and probably 3 days a week. I'm really a timid bike rider, and there's no way that I would have started riding my bike to work. I wouldn't even have had a thought that I could bicycle to work if there had not been a trail system. I was shocked when I started riding my bike down here at how many people I saw riding their bikes to the business park on the Murdoch Trail. You know, I'm a 50-something-year-old guy, and my life is completely different now than it was 5 years ago. If I can refashion myself and ride my bike to work, anybody can do it. The trails matter. I got the confidence to get back on a bicycle because I had a safe place to ride it. And if that system hadn't existed, I don't think I'd be on a bike today.
Okay, I don't really need to say a whole lot more than that, just that when we build active transportation systems, it's very important for the health of our communities and certainly adds to people's quality of life. So I'm going to put one more picture up here, and this picture is of my grandparents, and my dad's the oldest child, and my Uncle Bill and my Aunt Susie are in that picture. And this is a visual for me to remember to think about the end user of our system. And I think each one of you needs to think about what that image is you're going to carry with you so that you're always thinking about the end user of our system. So whether you are planning our roadways, our transportation system, whether you're designing it, whether you're constructing it, or whether you're maintaining it, think about that end user. And I'd like to say that I think that our people who work in maintenance probably understand this better than any of the rest of us, because they don't get up in the middle of the night to plow snow or clear a mudslide off a roadway to get it back open again just because it's their job. They do it because they're thinking about the end user. And for them, it's really personal because the end user is a member of their community. And likely, it's going to be their family and their friends that they're doing that for. And so I think we can learn something from that and make sure we're always thinking about that with our transportation system. So now let me just end with this. We are facing a big challenge in our state in terms of the growth that we expect to have. But I think that we're up to that challenge. And while it's going to improve our economy, it's going to make us have to really think about having all the transportation solutions available to us. And we're going to have to think through that. But what I want everybody to do is remember that the people are at the heart of our transportation solutions. And if we remember that, we'll make the decisions that really do improve the quality of life in Utah. Thank you.
Over the place, singing, we will rock you.